The topic for today is shared services, and if we feel to say that shared services is on the lips of everyone certainly in the federal government corporate arena at the moment, would be a massive understatement. And certainly from what I've been experiencing around various of our clients and things, the amount of activity and anxiousness, if I had to put it, that's being generated is absolutely enormous. So I just want to share with you a few of the insights that I've gained over my about last 10 or 15 years involvement in a variety of shared services. Just to give you a little bit of background on my shared services experience, I have been involved in the establishment of New South Wales Business Link, one of their shared service centres, for over about a 4-year period when they were first established. I've developed, and our firm's been involved in development of numerous shared services costing models at places like the Attorney General's Department and Department of Social Security. Also had an 18-month stint as the project director through the first establishments of the Department of Health's portfolio shared service centre a few years ago, and I'm currently working with the Department of Education and Employment Shared Service Centre, giving them some strategic advice. From a whole-of-government perspective as well, over the last few years I've worked with the Department of Finance and assisted them initially on their ERP consolidation study, helping them with some of the business cases and some strategic advice around that. And more recently and currently am working with them on some advice on the current shared service centres, Shared and Common Services initiative. Probably but when I look back at that experience that I've had through that time, one of the things that keeps hitting me is that a few of the insights that I'm going to share with you today probably conflict with some of the research that the more common research and things that you might find, or might even conflict with what seems to be the most logical or reasonable approach in the first instance. So I want to share with you those insights, but the main message I want to leave with you, and I suppose is key, is that shared services in government and shared services in Canberra is different. It's different to commercial organisations. When I think about the global CFO of Shell, who decides that shared services is a fantastic initiative to put across all of his subsidiary companies worldwide, and he's going to set up 3 shared service centres in different time zones around the country. When that global CFO says that's going to happen, what I can tell you is all the other CFOs in the subsidiary organisation say, "Yes, sir. How high, sir?" You could probably relate to that. Doesn't quite happen in government here. Someone to have that particular mandate and drive. So government is different to commercial, and Canberra's different to the other jurisdictions. There's lots of research and press out there about what's happened in WA, what's happened in Queensland, what's happened in New South Wales, and while we can certainly learn from those, Canberra once again is different. When I look around the agencies that are here, just the number of agencies, the size of the agencies we're dealing with, their maturity levels in terms of corporate services and shared services, are different to anyone else. Just one caveat, if I can. So obviously I have working currently with a number of local clients and things, but any of the views or statements that I make today, I just want to make the caveat are my personal views and not any of certainly the governments or the clients. Just what I want to run through in the agenda. I've done the introduction. Just going to give a quick status of where the initiative's at the moment. Just touch briefly on some of the benefits of shared services, but spend most of the time taking you through just what I see as some of the trials and tribulations should you start to go and implement and enter into a shared service arrangement. And just finish off with a little summary about just a few tips about the keys for success. Just in terms of the status of the current initiative, this initiative's been going for probably a couple of years now since the government first started looking at it, and it stems from a number of initiatives that the government's doing to do with the smaller government reform agenda, the contestability agenda, the digital transformation agenda, and as I mentioned previously, the ERP consolidation report that was published. I think earlier this year, late last year. The whole aim of these initiatives and the Shared and Common Services Initiative is to drive efficiencies and improve service delivery across the public sector. And the initial focus of that was looking at some of the high volume, low value, transactional type corporate services as the first step to implementing shared services. Any of the agencies that have been involved in this, there's been a huge amount of work and effort and gathering of data and working groups and the like. A lot of activity over the last 6 to 12 months, and as we speak now, the current status, I suppose, is that those whole of government implementation plans and strategies are under development, and we hope to have we hope to hear early in the new year some specific directions on that. Now I don't intend to try to convince you today that shared services is a good idea. We would probably be here all day if we tried to do that, and I'm not sure we'd agree. But I did want to run through just try and articulate a few of the key benefits of why you would be considering shared services in the first place. The first one. And I wrote it 3 times there, savings, savings, savings. Whenever I go to talk to agencies about shared services, people are very quick to come off on the front foot to say it's not about savings. This is not about savings. It's much, much more than that. Or they say it's not just about savings. And while I absolutely agree with that, but the fact is, and I suppose my experience has been, at the end of the day, if we don't end up with a more efficient service coming out of this, the service won't get past the business case stage, won't be implemented, and certainly won't, if there's not ongoing, continuous, efficiencies being gained from these ventures, it just won't survive. So in my mind, if you're putting into any business case, there has to be some savings there. When having been through the establishment and setup of a number of shared service centres, the amount of time and effort and I'd have to say heartache that it causes in doing it, from my perspective, then there bloody well better be some savings out the end of it. Otherwise, all that pain's won't be worth it and won't be sustained. The example, and in terms of the sort of savings that can be made, I mentioned before I had 4 years with the establishment of New South Wales Business Link. The first year of that was in their second year of operation. They were still budget funded, straight out of Treasury for that, and in the third year they were moving to a full fee-for-service system. Now, they were a shared service centre created out of three corporate areas out of 3 of the larger New South Wales government departments in the human services area. Took the entire corporate services, IT, HR, finance and all the other corporate services, put them together into a one shared service centre called New South Wales Business Link. Now, in those first 2 years were horrific. The customers weren't happy, people in the shared service centre weren't happy, and I actually had the misfortune of I'd been asked to attend a meeting with the then New South Wales Treasurer, who called in the Director Generals from the agencies and called in the CEO of New South Wales Business Link to read them all the riot act, where the clients wanted to disband it. 2 years in, said this isn't working. The services, have all gone to the pot. It's not working, and it was a little bit scary to see the New South Wales Treasurer issue the directive to the CEO to say he had 1 more year to make this work, and if these customers were still sitting here making the same complaint in 1 year, then everyone's fired and we call it quits. So that. That the first 2 years, were in that experience, I think everyone would say it would be an abject failure. There was a lot of work done through that last year, but probably probably one of the biggest things in the saving grace I presented to the board I ran, and with how people ran their costing and pricing models and all their billing and charging systems through that period. And the CEO, and I have to give the credit to him, not to us, managed to turn around from the original price we set at the start of the third year, in our first year of fee for service, made a 15% surplus. I call it a surplus because it's a not-for-profit organisation. And in about March that year, he actually rang me up and asked me if I could create a rebate model of how he was going to give this money back. And they were a separate company, New South Wales Business Link Pty Ltd. So he actually had the cash in the bank, and said, I'm a not-for-profit. I've made 15% surplus. I've got to give this back. When we presented that back to the board of New South Wales Business Link to say, in March we want to, we've been successful. Those same director generals were at the table there. The whole mood changed from that point in time. Savings were being delivered. They could see the efficiencies, and they were quite happy then to go on. So savings is, if the savings weren't there, if that had been a 5% increase, or if they'd been back asking for more money for budget, I can guarantee you probably New South Wales Business Link wouldn't have lasted past that point. The other major benefit that I like to touch on is the consolidation of expenditure on systems. I mentioned before I was involved in the whole of government ERP consolidation report, and certainly from my experience in advising on sort of ERP systems around town over the probably someone said 30 years in my boy. I'm not that old really, so that's. The number of projects that I see that people who have the same systems undertaking the same projects, trying to do the same reform agendas with their systems time after time, there's a huge opportunity there to rationalise some of that expenditure on ERP systems. From one perspective, Synergy as an accounting and consulting firm, it's good business, going and doing the same project in 4 or 5 different clients. But when I put my taxpayer's hat on and start to say, "Hey, come on, certainly there's got to be a better way of doing this." So I think that saving on consolidating those systems. The next one is I just want to touch on is the introduction of pricing signals, and basic economics. We'll tell you that if you have a free good or service, or something that's perceived to be a free good or service, then it will be overused and abused. And for those who live in the corporate world, getting demands from all of their divisions and customers can probably relate to this. When you move to shared services under a full fee for service arrangement, it allows those pricing signals to be introduced, even to your internal customers. And the way I like to represent that is that the fee-for-service model breaks the whole cost of corporate down to the cost of each individual service, and for each individual service that you're providing, breaks it down, the total cost down into the volumes times the unit cost. And putting that simply, then what you're able to do when you've got that is the unit cost is the provider's responsibility, and we should expect our shared service providers to take responsibility of that, and this is where they demonstrate their savings by year on year producing lower unit costs. What it makes clear now, though, if the total budget or the total cost of the service is going up because customers are continually asking for more and more service, and you see this in IT in particular, where the demand for storage and server computing power grows at 20 to 30% per annum. The CIOs are sitting there struggling to still deliver to all their requirements. They may be getting the unit cost down, but it's actually the demand side that's happening. So when that's made transparent and clear, what you get is some much more economical and rational choices being made about, do we really need that service? Do we really need that volume of service? And the unit cost is where you can keep your providers your providers honest and having them deliver their responsibilities. So that's about it for just the benefits. There's just a couple of others that I've listed there that are quite often listed in the literature, which I won't go through today. But I will move on to now implementation. So I'm going to presume for the moment, as I say, get past the business case. I'm going to presume that you've decided to enter into some form of shared service arrangement. If you decided to do that, or you've been directed to do that. And I'm not going to try and go through a detailed implementation plan, or to cover off all of the issues that you will need to address. There's literally thousands of a very complex set of issues that you'll have to address. But just to touch on a few of the more fundamental ones, I'll take those from a receiver of corporate services perspective, although a number of the issues are just as relevant from a provider's point of view as well. The first one is what services should be included in the scope. The initial scope of the federal government's initiative of shared and common services initially was considering services much wider than just corporate services, and was looking at any particular service that was common, that was a common service required by multiple agencies. That's still the broader agenda of it. However, in terms of the first steps in getting things on board, the focus has come down on the corporate services. When you look at corporate services, and I did have a hand in establishing a corporate services catalogue that tried to document every possible type of corporate services that would traditionally be provided by a corporate service organisation, covering finance, HR, payroll, ICT, and all the other corporate services. So we've got that scope of potential services that could be included in your shared services examination. The first point that I suppose I'd make is that for the moment ICT services seems to have dropped off the radar a bit, and the focus on the other three areas in there. And I can think of a couple of reasons, I suppose, for this. One, over the past decades, I suppose there has been a lot of IT outsourcing. So a lot of agencies have already outsourced their IT, or they have an external provider for their ICT services. The other part is they are specifically more complex and difficult, but also, except for the ERP systems, which I'll talk about a little bit later, the ICT services can, to a certain extent, be segregated from the other services. So it's a question, I think, for another day. But for the moment, the ICT services seem to be off the radar. The rest of the services then were classified into three groups. These high volume, low value, transactional type services. These value added, or as I prefer to call them, advisory type of services, and strategic or value added services. Typically, as I said, and if you read any of the typical advice on this, says to focus on the transactional services. That if you're going to do shared services, certainly first off, get into the low value, high volume, transactional type services. I suppose from my point of view, I'd like to challenge that a bit, and while I definitely don't disagree with it potentially as a first step, there is a strong business case for including the value-added services. The strategic services as such are normally ones that would stay with the receiving department because they are strategically important to providing advice and assistance to the executive of an organisation. But the reasons I believe that value-added services should be in there is, firstly, for many agencies, and certainly in the small to medium category, they really struggle to get specific expertise in some domain areas. For example, they might have to rely on a generalist in the HR and finance areas to provide some complex advice or support on your enterprise agreement negotiations or WHS issues or FBT advice, or stay up to date with the latest accounting standards. And generally, I suppose small to medium agencies may get by and may struggle with either a generalist providing that services or having to buy that service in from external organisations. A shared service centre providing those value-added services can take the sort of 1/5 of a person that you need on the FBT issues that it have across 5 agencies adds up to one FBT expert that can be engaged, can work all day every day in FBT, and on the fee-for-service basis make themselves available on either a retainer or an hourly rate basis back to the agencies. So I think it's not this is not a cost saving, but this is where including those services gets a better service for you in that realm. The other main reason is whenever I do corporate services costing exercises and look at an organisation, and we did this in the recent whole of government benchmarking exercise, when I have a look at where the big dollars are, the bigger dollars are in the value-added services, not the transactional services. So the transactional services tend to be down in terms of the total spend on that in the right-hand side, and a lot of the value-added services are up in the right-hand side. So it gives, if you're looking at potential opportunities in there, it's certainly a bigger pool to start with. The other one that is up in the higher end as well is the ERP support costs. Typically far bigger than, and in some cases, as I've seen, far bigger than all of the transactional services put together. So looking at your ERP support costs and throwing them into your shared services scope is encouraged. And finally, the other reason for wanting to put transactional and value-added services in scope is that the cost of establishing any shared service arrangement is significant. The cost to establish it, getting service levels in place, getting contracts in place, and there is an ongoing overhead to then manage that, what is in essence will be an outsourced arrangement going forward. The greater you can spread those overheads over a larger pool of services, the more efficient and effective your shared service arrangement will be. So I suppose my advice, I suppose, in terms of when you're looking down the scope and going through the list of services, is to ask why a service shouldn't be included, as opposed to try and justify why it should be included. And the more the merrier, I say. So if you're going to do this, then do it properly and get in boots and all to get it going. The next issue I want to talk about is the business model that you're going to establish when you go into a shared service arrangement. Now, this primarily relates to the business model that the provider is going to operate on, but it is absolutely important for a receiver to understand exactly what they're getting themselves in for, because this will drive your experience for the next 10 to 20 years or however long the arrangement is going to make. So you need to consider this business model carefully. Broadly, there's a continuum of different options that can happen here, but broadly from one end, there's the in-house option where there's a lead agency decides to set themselves up as a shared service provider, and basically that's done in-house within government. On the right-hand side there, you have the more traditional fully outsourced model where you'll package up a group of services and run a tender and contract in a commercial provider. And then in the middle, there's some options around having a standalone government corporate entity that provides those services. And as in the UK experience, may or may not involve some private equity in that. I'll just make a few points on each model, and this is by no means a full evaluation or critique of each of them to recommend either of them, but just a few points that I see when I look at each of these models. Firstly, the in-house model. Any of those who have been involved in receiving services from say a smaller or medium agency from their larger portfolio agency, there's a real perception, I'll call it perception because it's not necessarily reality, that the host agency is biased, or there is some some bias where they're looking after their own interests ahead of the other services. When you put and I think regardless of whatever mechanisms and things are put in place, you're going to still always have that potential perception there. The second is, I have to actually question why any particular government agency would want to be a shared service provider, would want to take that lead. If I look at their strategic plans and their, there's no mention in there that how the objective of our organisation is to provide shared services to government. And even when I see the executive of some agencies who are absolutely behind it and driving it, I have seen also over the time that as those executives change, you lose that support and commitment. The first time one of those executives is sort of tapped on the shoulder by a secretary of another department, at a intergovernment meeting somewhere saying, my pay was wrong last week. You can tell me this executive starts to think, why the hell am I doing this? Is this strategic to our organisation? So I have some concerns about that. About the in-house organisations. Delivering corporate services is hard. It's a thankless task, as many of you would could attest to. And if you want to go into the business of providing corporate services, then you need to be really, really serious about it. I won't say too much about the outsourced options. Many of you here and many in government would be experienced with outsourcing, in particular in the IT arena. The main comment I would make is, I suppose, when I look around at and when you're looking at outsourcing opportunities, one of the things you do is you go into the market and you want to find someone who provides that exact service, is already doing it for other customers, doing it in the region. One of the concerns, I suppose, that I have is when I look around the service providers, I don't see too many of them operating in Canberra. There's a few of them, a lot of them who have some government experience. But getting back to my theme, I suppose, of the talk, that Canberra is different, government is different. So we really have to test with any outsourced providers. Do they really understand your requirements? Do they understand your EA? Do they know? Can they spell PGPA, for example? So I have some concerns about how successful some of the outsourcing arrangements would be. If I move to the corporate government entity model, so this is still a government, or certainly a semi-government organisation that would have its own board, would be operating on a full fee-for-service basis outside of the budget framework. And as I said, in the UK model, they also had some part private equity involved in that. Would probably and could probably involve the employees moving off the Public Service Act. And the key criteria, whenever I'm looking at each of these models, when I look at what's needed in each of these models to drive success, one of the first things I see is the access to capital. Setting up a shared service centre is expensive. It requires significant investment, not only in just getting the organisation set up, but then investing in the processes and systems to make sure that they are best practice and delivering on those cost savings. The transition costs up front are significant. When the benefits may appear some years down the front. So whatever model you're in, you're going to make sure that the organisation has that access to the capital, that it has access to a flexible workforce. Most of the improvement opportunities and things, and certainly if you're looking at commercial organisations where they will say they can introduce some benefits to the Commonwealth, will be about realigning the current workforce that we're delivering corporate services. But the main part I have, I suppose, is the access to the commercial skill sets. There is a whole set of additional commercial skill sets that a provider needs around sales, around costing and pricing, around delivering to service levels, which when you enter an environment, and certainly a fee-for-service environment where people are paying and organisations are paying real hard cash for your services, the level of detail and accuracy that's required in those areas are significant. What I have observed across the number of shared service centres and establishment, a lot of people don't make it through that transition. It's difficult. You're under a lot more pressure, and as a public servant and things, you're potentially not getting paid any more to do it. So you have to look at your provider and say how are they going to get those commercial skill sets. And finally, does the organisation that you're entering into business with have that customer service culture? And the customer service culture is one that says, when a customer rings me up and asks for some service, my first answer is yes, love to help you, and then I have the commercial discussion about how they're going to pay for this. So it is that understanding and having that drive to be able to deliver everything for your customers' requirements within a limit and within a price. What I would say, I suppose, in terms of all of those models, and all those models, are currently being considered, the jury's still out. If you had to ask my advice as to which one's the best model, I couldn't tell you. I think I've seen good and bad examples of all models, but some of those fundamental criteria I mentioned, you should be carefully considering when you're looking at any options. Now, systems. I mentioned before that systems are one of the larger expenditure items when we're looking at corporate services. And typically, when you're looking at any outsourcing arrangements, as in a shared service arrangement, the fundamental rule is that you shouldn't get involved in how a service provider is going to deliver your services. What you should do is just be very clear about your requirements and your service levels, but you leave it to the provider how they deliver it. So you don't really care if they've got a bunch of abacuses out the back, doing your accounts for you, as long as your accounts come out on time, accurate, payments are made, etc. However, the ERP system that is the engine room for any shared service provider, it supports most of the corporate services that you'll be asking them to deliver, and the system that they're using will not only drive the costs of your services, because it is a large component of it. It will also drive the look and feel of, because you will be interacting with it in a lot of the self-service portals and various other reporting facilities that they provide. But more importantly, the actual system will drive the business processes that you'll have to adopt. It's a commonly accepted principle in when implementing ERPs that you want to try and implement them as vanilla as possible. To take the commercial off-the-shelf systems, implement them, and have as minimal customisations as possible. So that means that you are going to adjust your business processes to fit the system to a certain extent. That gets extrapolated in a shared service environment, because what the shared service provider wants to do to get their economies of scale is to have every business process exactly the same and you to fit the way their system works. They don't want to make individual variations for individual people. So the system that they're using to deliver their services will drive a standard business process that you'll be required to follow. The potential problem is one size doesn't fit all. If I look at the procure-to-pay process for some of the larger government departments in town that are typically supported by SAP, there may be 15 to 20 steps in that procure-to-pay process that it goes through, which is needed for a large agency distributed around the country with multiple delegation levels and some very large value, big procurements happening. Now that process is not going to suit a small agency who has a small number of people all in one office or one building, where what would suit them much more is, primarily maybe a mostly manual process, because they can walk forms across the other side of the office to get signed. and a much smaller, cheaper system, in the sort of MYOB or zero category. So my main recommendation, what I would say is to break that main principle of outsourcing and have a good hard look at what system you're moving to. When I was involved in the ERP consolidation report, got to have a look at all of most of the agencies around town and the ERP systems that they had, and look for ways to how we could rationalise those. In my view, when I looked at that from a whole of government perspective, I saw that could come down to three systems that could three applications that could meet most of the government's requirements. There would be a tier 1 system that's for the large and/or complex organisations. Right at the moment, that's SAP. If you go through those large, big organisations, and would probably remain SAP. What I saw was there was a need for a smaller, less complex, more flexible and cheaper solution at the tier 2 level. The particular issue here was that tier 2 solution needed to be fully functional, and by that I meant have all of the productivity tools that the tier 1 systems can provide. When I look around a number of the agencies who are using sort of these tier 2 systems, they invariably all would like to have fully functioning self-service portals, to have full workflow, to have totally integrated HR payroll with their finance systems. And in a lot of cases, some have got those features and they've spent a lot of money on their own getting those features. Others are sitting there going, I'd love to have them, but I just can't afford them. I can see in the shared service environment that we're able to rationalise those down to one tier 2 system that would be able to provide those facilities to everybody. And the third tier is really for what I see for the micro agencies, and these are the ones that actually probably won't benefit much from a shared service arrangement, won't benefit much from even sharing their ERPs, but that they would have access to a whole of government contract for the MYOBs or zeros, if you like, that they could use on a software as a service basis. So some advice just to be careful when considering your ERPs, and make sure you get the right sized one for your organisation. Staff. I can't tell you how many times I suppose I've gone into starting to talk to customers, potential customers of a shared service centre environment, and find out that no one's actually talked to their staff about what the implications of this arrangement are for them. And right from the start, you've got everyone's back up. You're in there in a meeting trying to progress the transition to a shared service centre, and the people in the area affected, just aren't helping, aren't involved, aren't engaged, and to the other point, are trying to tell you every possible way this will not work. As soon as you mentioned shared services, that you're investigating shared services in any organisation, people start to worry. They're worried about their job's going to change. They're going to have a new boss. Are they going to have a new employer? Will they be made redundant? Will their paying conditions change? All these valid and important questions that if you don't get answered and you can't give them answers to those questions up front, then you're going to strike extreme resistance and pushback, right from the start. And it's hard enough as it is. The main thing I think in negotiating some of this, in terms of being able to answer some of those questions as to where people are going to be and what's going to happen to their jobs, sometimes requires, do I know who the provider's going to be, and which business model I'm going to enter into. So with and it is, when I look at it from a whole of government perspective right now, that may be something that the government needs to take a position on as to what's going to happen with the movement of staff as shared service centres are established. So my main recommendation, I suppose, is that if anyone in your organisation is thinking about shared service centre, then get a comprehensive communication and change management in place right now. This is an alternate approach to setting up a shared service, and it's commonly referred to as the lift and shift model. And It's a slower means to potentially develop savings, but can be implemented quicker and certainly with low risk. Basically what it involves, I suppose, is that if you're in the scenario I'll run here is that 4 agencies have got together to establish a shared service centre or are moving into an existing shared service centre provider. Instead of transitioning and all of their systems and all their people over to the shared service centres systems and processes, that you pick up the organisations, the 4 pay teams, the 4 ERP support teams, the 4 ERPs themselves, and shift them over and put them under the responsibility and control of the shared service centre. Now, what you might say is, okay, at this point, what's the point? Nothing's changed. What you do have in that first phase of that implementation, from a customer's perspective, it's the same people using the same systems and the same business processes, processing people's pay. So nothing's changed. Very low risk, quick to implement. What starts to happen from then is that we have one now director of the payroll teams. That director, in their weekly meetings when they're sitting down with their payroll people, can start to share some of the best practices across those teams. So they're sitting down and someone's come up with a better way of doing the redundancy calculations. They're able to share that. They've got a great way of doing that. They're able to share that with all the other teams. Everyone thinks that's a great idea. Or more importantly, what they might do is then say, okay, customer team 4 is the expert at doing redundancy calcs. Let's get them to do them for everybody. So immediately from day one, you start to get some of these efficiencies. If they had some shortfalls in some sicknesses, people off sick, or some staff turnover, if you like, then the people across teams can start to fill those gaps instead of bringing on casual or temporary staff. Similar things can happen at the ERP level. You can leave the systems there, so we're not doing a systems change here. It's still the same system, your same data, your same people using those systems, but we can consolidate the ERP support teams. So if we had 4 solutions architects in each of the agencies previously, do we need 4 going forward? And ultimately, you would put the long-term responsibility on the shared service centre provider to say, stage 1, is a low-risk implementation. There's no savings from here. But what I want you to do now is over the next year to 5 years is to get us those progressive savings going forward, and leave it to the shared service centre provider to deliver those. And I talked before about some of that resistance of people to change. One of the main benefits of this approach is once all those people are working together and maybe spent 6 months or 12 months working together in a payroll team, and they all have one boss, at the end of the day, it is much easier to actually implement changes to business processes or changes to systems rather than when they all work in 4 different organisations. Okay, I'll wrap up now. Besides say there is a whole procurement and contracting layer, and even if you're considering shared services within your portfolio agency or within government, I'd urge you to still consider it to be a major outsourcing exercise, and that once you enter into this, the chances are you're not going to get out of it for the next decade. It's really hard to get out of it. So make sure you resource that activity properly and undertake it as you would any other major outsourcing activity. So I'll wrap up there with, I suppose, just summarising the keys to success are, resource that procurement properly, consider that lift and shift model that I talked about, get your change management in place now, look closely at your ERPs. The business models, can't give you too much advice on which one's the best one there. I think the jury's out, but consider them, and I'd urge you to make the scope of your exercises as wide as possible. So thanks for your time. Hopefully I didn't put you to sleep, and I'm happy to take any questions.